Hi, everybody. So my name is Maya Fennig. I'm a new faculty member at the School of Social Work at Tel Aviv University. And my research focuses on the mental health and psychosocial consequences of exposure to armed conflict, war, and forced migration on children, youth, and families. Unfortunately, this topic has become extremely relevant after the October 7th terrorist attacks and the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. Shortly after the beginning of the war, I had the privilege of partnering with Schneider Children's Medical Hospital, who received the children and youth that were released from captivity in late November. In this project, we wanted to evaluate the feasibility, fidelity, and acceptability of a modified psychological first aid intervention that was provided to the children and youth in the hospital. Now, we know that abduction of children in armed conflict is a pervasive and global problem with serious effects both on physical and mental health. According to UN data, there are about 4,000 children every year being abducted in armed conflict contexts. Just a couple of months ago, 300 children were abducted in Nigeria by Boko Haram, a terrorist group. There's ongoing abductions of children in the Ukraine-Russian war, and ongoing abductions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where children are enlisted into armed forces. Despite the severity of this problem and its worldwide effects, the vast majority of studies have focused on adult soldiers. And there's very little research on its effects, on the effects of captivity on children, let alone interventions. So we know very little, again, about how it impacts children, and we have no clinical guidelines to guide interventions. Because of this, there's numerous questions unanswered. What's the ideal timing, duration of interventions targeted at children released from captivity? How do we address acute stress reactions? And how do we facilitate children's re-entry into their familial and social worlds? We try to answer these questions in our current study. And so what we did is designed a mixed method evaluation study, combining both qualitative in-depth interviews and quantitative surveys and questionnaires in order to produce rich complementary data. We focused on the medical staff providing the intervention, interviewing them. We did not talk to the children themselves out of ethical concerns. And so I wanted to share with you today 3 key intervention principles that we learned during this evaluation study. Establishing safety, multi-level family-based interventions, and the hospital setting. So first of all, practitioners repeated time and time again that establishing safety was a key concern in their interventions. With the younger children, this meant really establishing a difference between the time in captivity and the safety of the current environment. Some of the young children were confused. Am I now in Israel? Am I going back to Gaza? So really using child-appropriate methods, the first concern was establishing the sense of safety, and at the same time, constantly giving children choice and control in order to regain that self-efficacy that was robbed from them during captivity. If it was from the room that they were choosing, to the medical exams, to the food that they could eat, constantly giving them choice and control over their environment. Applying a multi-layered family-based approach was central to the intervention. So again, we know that when we're treating children, it's not just with the individual child, we're looking at the whole family. But here we need to remember that families were reuniting with their children after more than 50 days in captivity. And at the same time, these families were themselves exposed to the October 7th attacks, and they were dealing with extreme distress, family disruption, and displacement. So practitioners shared with us that this reunification process, they really had to intervene with multiple family members at a very short period of time. So very complex and intensive family-based interventions. And while interventions with the families that were waiting for their children focused on reformulating this family bond, on the reunification process, with mothers who themselves were with their children in captivity, it was actually about creating space. So during captivity, mothers were in constant high alert, doing everything they could to protect their children. And so when they were already in safety in the hospital, they had trouble letting go of that self-protective role. And so interventions focused on creating a healthy and appropriate distance between them and their children so they can begin the healing process. Implementing the intervention in a hospital rather than a community setting was consistently seen as a strength of the intervention. It allowed to provide holistic treatment by a multidisciplinary health team, pediatricians, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, all working together as one team under one roof, providing holistic care. At the same time, the hospital setting allowed to create a transitional space between the trauma of captivity and the challenges of community reintegration. Unfortunately, these children were not going back to these whole happy families, right? We know that some of the children still have family members in captivity. A lot of the communities were shattered in the October 7th attacks and displaced. And so this time in the hospital really allowed time to start rethinking all these very complex questions, where they're going to, what kinds of families they're going back to, what kind of communities they're going back to, and make very difficult decisions about just the beginning of the healing process. And so today I'm happy to say that we do have the scholarly and clinical knowledge we need to treat children, youth, and families that have been in captivity. But what we don't have is time. What those still in captivity don't have is time. We need to bring them home now. Thank you.